and ask, where are the Impressionists? And the consummate Impressionist, Claude Monet, we have an extraordinary collection of his work. I'm just showing you the great 1872 Bridge at Argenteuil on the left, and then his very famous painting of his wife and son, Madame Monet, and his young son standing on a hillside. These are paintings that are all about sunshine and the beautiful French countryside just outside the city, the suburbs, beautiful fashions, leisure time. Here's a wonderful slide. This is one of my favorite slides that is actually quite close to the way these paintings are hung in the main classic Impressionist gallery. You have flanking Monet's Artist's Garden at Vétoil, two paintings of little girls by Renoir, Auguste Renoir, who is one of my favorite painters in the gallery's collection. And you see him, actually, the little girl with the watering can at the right is, I believe, one of the most popular paintings at the gallery. And we know that because the reproduction of the picture, little girl with a watering can, in postcard form is the greatest seller. So we sell more reproductions of her than any other painting in the gallery. And then at the far left, a painting of a girl with a hoop. This is a 19th century game that kids would play in parks in Paris. And then that Claude Monet was an ardent gardener. And this is before he buys his property in Giverny. He owned a garden just behind his house in Vétoil, and this beautiful spring shot of sunflowers, and again some children and his wife on the staircase. But these again are paintings about color, and I think this is why they're so popular. They're just so exuberant and joyful. And I will say that what I usually do, I think it's great that people love these pictures so much. It is incredibly difficult to control this volume of color. And Renoir and Monet are absolute geniuses to be able to pull this off. For any of our painters in the audience, you know how hard it is when you start to play with really vibrant colors on the palette. So these are very difficult to pull off, and I think rightfully sort of universally acclaimed. And I just throw this in because this is one of my favorite pictures by Renoir. It surprises people, and so just as a little surprise to make sure you all are still awake, this is actually from 1870, so before the Impressionist movement has begun in 1874. This is Renoir playing in the genre of Orientalism. This is his girlfriend / model, Lise Trehaut, and he's borrowed or rented a costume from North Africa, and he sort of tricked out his studio with objects that have a kind of Orientalist sort of aura. And it's a fantastic picture. Again, one of my favorites, the way that he's able to convey the fabrics, the various textures, from transparent bodice to the sort of heavily brocaded jacket that she wears, the feather coming off her headdress, and then that incredibly erotic pose and expression. I just think it's one of the more powerful pictures. Also extremely popular, obviously, are the works that we have by these two guys, these bad boys of French painting, Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin. And we happen to have two fantastic self-portraits by them. We are now into post-Impressionism. These painters were very much inspired by the Impressionists, but took French painting, avant-garde French painting, in radical new directions. They were close friends, and they shared a kind of messianic missionary zeal about their project of painting. They felt that they were sort of sent to the world to not only redeem French painting, but also sort of the role of artists in society, as well as society itself. I mean, they felt that their impact was going to be much broader than just making a body of work. They both also, interestingly, looked intently to non-Western culture and art. I'm just going to show you two paintings by Vincent van Gogh, who, you know, I think he's having another resurgence of popularity. There's a project you may have heard about traveling across America. I think it's called the Van Gogh Experience, which does not include actual art objects, but sort of capitalizes on this insatiable hunger for anything having to do with Van Gogh in America, certainly. The painting at the upper left is my favorite. It's called La Mousme, and it is inspired by a novel that Van Gogh reads by Pierre Loti, Madame Chrysanthemum. It's based on a kind of sort of orientalizing fictional account that Pierre Loti writes about Japan. And Van Gogh travels down to Arles and feels that he has discovered the Japan of southern France in terms of color and light and a kind of exotic other. And it's just, this is such a spectacular, vibrant image. And then interestingly for our audience, I think, is the picture at the lower right. It's called Roses, and it was given to the gallery by Pamela Harriman, who was, of course, the American ambassador to France in Paris under the presidency of Bill Clinton. So this painting hung in the American ambassador's residence in Paris. And then she ended up giving it to, in honor of one of her husbands, Averil Harriman, to the National Gallery. And so it hangs permanently on our walls. And then I believe that one of the most successful galleries in the French paintings department in the West Building is the Cézanne Gallery. It's one of my favorite places to go. We do not have the largest collection of Cézanne in the country, but I think it is one of the strongest, and particularly we are able to show this great French painter in all three of the genres in which he sort of basically deconstructed still life, landscape, and figure painting. And these three pictures are iconic images in those three genres. There's the still life with the peppermint bottle in the upper left, this marvelous Houses in L'Estaque, and then I hope you're all familiar with the wonderful boy in a red waistcoat, which Paul Mellon, it was Paul Mellon's favorite picture. And it was the cover image of our great Cézanne Portrait exhibition that we did a couple of years ago. And this was the one that we shared with the Musée d'Orsay. We do quite a bit of work with the Louvre, of course, and with the Musée d'Orsay, among other French museums. But we had a wonderful time working on Cézanne's portraits with our colleagues at the Orsay. And it was this exhibition that I had the great honor and pleasure of touring Madame Macron and Mrs. Trump, the first ladies, took a little moment out of an incredibly busy day to come and see this show. We spent about 25 minutes looking at these pictures. And I still, to this day, recall an incredibly smart comment that Madame Macron made about another version of this same subject, the same model, Michelangelo de Rosa, in a work that David Rockefeller owned. And that picture had not been able to travel to the Orsay venue of this exhibition. And I was showing her the Rockefeller picture, which was here at the gallery, and she noticed that she hadn't seen it in the Orsay version of the exhibition. So that was, it really warmed the curatorial cockles of my heart to find such an august public figure really paying attention to the things that these national museums, this wonderful program that the national museums collaborated on. So that was really exciting. Let's see.
I'm not surprised by what you say about Mrs. Macron, because she's very, very knowledgeable. She has high culture. She was teaching French literature, and she always gave to the students a curriculum marrying art and literature. So she has always been very open and very eager to share her passion for literature and art. Just something that is amusing for people who are French here, is that when you talked about the West Building, um, whose architect is Mr. Pei. Well, so another common point with the Louvre in Paris, where we have the pyramid by the same architect. So two different places across the ocean, but with the touch of the same architect. And another something that is a little bit amusing, you talked about the House of Cards by Chardin. And, you know, for French people who were completely fascinated by the TV show House of Cards, it's quite funny to think that this painting by Chardin of the 18th century arrived in Washington, D.C., specially made for these circumstances.
That's a great comment. And in fact, the in the House of Cards, the gallery is a venue. There's a furtive, you know, sort of terrifying meeting, you know, between some nefarious politicos, and one of those meetings takes place just off the rotunda in the West Building. So we were really excited.
I must admit that I haven't seen this TV show, but I've heard about it a lot.
Yeah.
So now, Mary, could you share with us your thoughts and feelings about the paintings that should be for you the most emblematic of the National Gallery of Washington, D.C.? Oh, I see that you have chosen Napoleon by David. So we are very touched by this choice. Could you tell us more?
Well, I mean, it's, you know, yeah, it's a very, very powerful picture. And, you know, it may not be the most emblematic of our collection, but I think for this audience, you know, it could be the most poignant, and it's also quite relevant, given that 2021 is l'année Napoléon, being, well, we'll talk about that, being sort of celebrated, or let's say commemorated in France this year. This is a portrait that Jacques-Louis David, the great, you know, one of the greatest French painters and the great neoclassical painter, does of one of his great sort of patrons, Napoleon, rather late. This is from 1812. And so you may be thinking of the more famous portrait of Napoleon on horseback crossing the Pyrenees. The great romantic. It's probably the sort of poster image for the romantic hero of the late 18th, early 19th century. This portrait, I love this painting because it's quite apart. It's definitely heroic, but now you have Napoleon actually in his study. And so, you know, there's a reference there in the sword that's laying on his fauteuil there at his left. That, of course, he's the great general, the great imperial master, military strategist. But this portrait is all about Napoleon staying up all night, writing himself at his desk, the Code Napoleon. So you can see that it's rolled up. The code is rolled up on his desk, down at his feet. And I'm sure he's sitting there all night long writing, and at his feet he has a gigantic tome of Plutarch, because in order to construct this incredible backbone of the French legal and governmental system, he is going to be consulting the great classic philosophers and historians. And you see that the candle on his desk is burned way low. The clock up just behind him shows that it's 10 to 4 a.m. He is a little bit disheveled. He's a little bit sweaty. His hair is a little bit unkempt. He has a 5 o'clock shadow. He hasn't shaved because he has been working on behalf of the French people all night long, putting this code together. Of course, he, you know, this is not accurate at all. He had prior to 1812 and prior to the debut of the Code Napoleon, he had legions of hundreds. I think 600 lawyers were working on this tract. But this is a great act of political propaganda on the part of David. Absolutely spectacular. It's, you know, it's not the kind of thing that I think the contemporary French audience in 1812 would have responded to. They knew where the Code Napoleon came from. And in fact, it wasn't made for the French audience. It was a commission from a British Duke living in Scotland who wanted an image of Napoleon, and this is what David produces. Napoleon himself loved the painting, had a replica made by David. It actually belongs to Versailles, but we have this original portrait coming from the Crest Foundation. So it's a difficult time for Napoleon and the reception of Napoleon and the consideration of Napoleon, 2021. And I think really those two terms, are we celebrating and glorifying Napoleon with the series of exhibitions, mostly in France, but around the world? Or are we commemorating and sort of, reconsidering Napoleon and his impact, which is absolutely ineluctable on the French nation? He is, and at the gallery, we are hard at work in the West Building and the East Building, sort of contextualizing and providing a historical perspective for images like this. I mean, in my opinion, you can't really exhibit an image, a painting like this, as we do in the center of one of the central galleries off the sculpture court, without providing sort of context for who this man was, for the history of Europe, for the history of France, and for our collection. Napoleon, of course, he stages the coup d'etat in 1799, the 18th Brumaire. In 1804, he crowns himself emperor and initiates a really aggressive imperial campaign across Europe. And then one aspect, as we, really sort of return to conventional historical narratives of Europe and open up and expose and rediscuss certain chapters of that colonial history. It's important to recall that during the French Revolution, slavery was abolished. In 1802, Napoleon brings it back, brings slavery back to the French colonies. And so we need to sort of discuss this and talk about it, and really talk about the complexity of a world historic figure like Napoleon. So great painting, really important painting, not a painting that we want to put away, but a painting that we want to use as the focal point to talk about some of the more difficult aspects of our Western history. It's just an incredible opportunity. So I'm looking forward. I mean, we've just reopened the West Building, and I'm looking forward over the next couple of years, really, to a project that we're discussing of refreshing the stories that we tell in the West Building, of using technology to help tell those stories, of engaging a younger and more diverse demographic, attracting a more diverse demographic to the stories that we tell. So, it's a really great moment for the National Gallery. We just unfurled our rebranded National Gallery just a few weeks ago. I hope some of you saw that. And it's just going to be really exciting moving forward.
Thank you, Mary. Well, it's going to be very interesting, and you put a new light on this painting, and David was the one also who worked on the propaganda for Napoleon, because he was the one chosen to make a painting of the coronation.
Yep.
The point that is going to be very interesting for us is that what we see is that everything is going to be very maybe politically correct. All this new, we are going to discover a new face of Napoleon, thanks to the lens through which you're going to present his work, his reign. So it's going to be very, very interesting, and we see that National Gallery follows a big trend, maybe not of rewriting history, but give a new light on some events and part of our history. So it's going to be a great adventure.
Yes.
It's going to be very interesting, maybe dangerous, but very interesting. So we will all see that with a great interest. Tell us now, what are your favorite, really favorite artworks? The one that you love deeply in your art. We know that you love them all, but maybe you have some favorite.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. often curators' favorites are comprised of pictures that they have had a hand in bringing into the collection, acquisitions. And in the roughly decade that I've been able to work with the gallery, I'm just going to show you a couple of these. This was actually the very first acquisition in 2010 when I arrived that that I was able to signal and get support for. It's a wonderful picture by Jean-François Detois. It's certainly a Rococo painting of the abduction of Europa. Beautiful little picture, great color, wonderful technique, great, wonderful story from Ovid of Jupiter who falls in love with the Princess Europa. And so he, as he always was doing, transforms himself into, in this case, a gorgeous white bull. And he kind of moseys over to the group of ladies in waiting, spending some time with the princess, and they fall in love with him because he's so beautiful. As you can see, they start to decorate him with flowers. Europa pets him and climbs up on his back, and kablam, he's out of there, off to Crete in order to procreate, basically, Europe. And so great, wonderful, dramatic subject, but I think taken with a light hand in this work by Detois, which came up at auction. It was actually an auction through a house in Senlis, which I had never visited before, outside of Paris. And we were able to get this for a very small price, in part because the signature and the date had been covered up at some point for some unknown reason. And so it was a painting unsigned and undated. When we brought it back to the gallery and cleaned it, those were unveiled. They appear on the tree trunk at the right. So that was really exciting, but it's just a wonderful, light, sort of narrative painting that I think works really well with our Fragonards and Watteaus and Bouchers. A slightly more august, sort of heavy with gravitas picture that came in just a few years. This is the most recent acquisition for the French paintings collection. This is a work from the early 17th century by Simone Vouet, who had been a major painter in Rome when Rome really was the center of painting in Europe. And you think about Caravaggio, and everybody's drinking the Kool-Aid of Caravaggio in the early part of the 17th century in Rome, and what Caravaggio brings to painting in its sort of monumentality and a kind of realist sensuality. And Simone Vouet is there painting. He's called back to by Louis XIII to be his court painter in 1627. And this is now just a few years after that, in which he has established his own studio and really sort of comes up with what would become the great school of French painting in the 17th century. You think about Poussin in particular. And what I love about this painting is that it has that marvelous sort of Roman feel. She's a real Romana, this Madonna, and she's just in love with her baby. There's a real sensuality to this fantastic image. It's a composition that Vouet would be very famous for, the Madonna and Child. He did about a dozen paintings that were immediately engraved and disseminated around Europe, but this is the only known version that is signed and dated by Vouet. And you see, for instance, the French tricolor there. It's just a sort of a classically French painting, but indebted to the European, pan-European cult around Caravaggio. So really one of my favorite pictures.
The composition is quite original because it's very seldom to see infant Jesus turning his back towards the viewer. Usually is blessing or is nursed or is looking at the viewer. He is completely in love with the Virgin Mary.
Yeah, it's really sweet. I mean, it's a very intense moment between mother and child. In fact, when it was discovered a couple of years ago, it hadn't been on the market. The little baby Jesus was covered. There was a fabric that somebody had painted probably in the 19th century just to cover up some of that nakedness. Also, her neck and her shoulder were covered with a fabric. And so somebody clearly was, and her hair was neatened up into a little chignon. So we had to, a wonderful conservator removed all of that overpaint to reveal actually a paint surface that was in excellent condition underneath. But at some point, somebody was uncomfortable, I think, with the sensuality. But this is what I think is the power of this painting. I mean, this is, the Virgin and baby Jesus. So it's obviously an august subject. But it's also, I think, very relatable in this moment of the kind of tactile relationship between that adheres to the relationship between mothers and their babies. Anyway, so this is one of my favorites. You will find this in the 17th century galleries, which are not on the right side of the rotunda. A little bit difficult to find, but
who was the owner? Where did you buy it? Was it in France or was it somewhere else in the world?
It had actually left France, we think sometime in the 19th century for Italy. It came out of northern Italy from a family. It had been in a family that had ties to France. So it was a French family that had migrated to Italy and been in Italy for at least 100 years. And so in discovery, I mean, it was not known. This composition wasn't known, the painting wasn't known. So it was really exciting. Yeah, I just, again, one of my favorite pictures. I am a huge fan. I am actually an expert in 19th century French, and one of my great favorites of the century is Camille Corot, who, of course, was the great landscape painter. I mean, I just don't think you would have had the ascendance of landscape as the genre, the most ambitious genre of 19th century French painting without Corot, who takes landscape painting from the neoclassical tradition of the 1820s all the way up to the feet of the Impressionists in the 1870s. What is less known is Corot as a figure painter. And it so happens that in the Chesterdale collection, we have his finest example, his largest example. This is almost life-size. This wonderful 1866 picture of Agostina, just a kind of, very, she's almost like a symbol of Italy. One of the models of Corot dressed in the garb of the Italian Campagna, and just in her broad shoulders and the kind of monumental way in which her facial features are described, and her presence. And so I was inspired by this picture really to do an exhibition that we were able to do a couple of years ago on the female figure paintings of Corot. And I hope that some of your members were able to see that exhibition. We have one of the strongest collections of Corot's work anywhere. Sorry, this is my puppy keeps wanting to come in and hear all about the French paintings of the National Gallery.
Well, I'm very happy that you chose Corot, because I have a special relationship with Corot, because he's from Ville d'Avray in the suburb of Paris, and he painted a very large number of the pounds at Ville d'Avray. And I wanted to know what you think about that. There is a sort of mythology in France saying that Corot was that you can find a Corot with the pounds of Ville d'Avray in every museums of the world. Every time I go to a museum and check, and I will find Ville d'Avray by Corot. And there is a myth saying that Corot was very generous with his signature, helping friends. So that there are a lot of Corots that are not supposed to be done by Corot, but by other people who just, with his agreement, because he was very generous and helpful, allowed them to put his signature. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I mean, the joke that we tell in the United States is that Corot painted 3,000 paintings in his long life, in his long career, 5,000 of which are in American public collections. And it's true, every single art museum in the country has a Corot landscape painting, mostly these late Ville d'Avray souvenirs. And so that's what was so exciting, to just sort of refocus attention on an aspect of his oeuvre that was much less known. But yes, the Corot attribution field is very lively. I mean, there's a lot of work being done trying to separate out what is by his hand and what is not. I think equally for the work of Gustave Courbet, attribution is there a lot of it's a very sort of contested field. But with the figures, less so, because they were less well known. In fact, he didn't exhibit his female figures during his life. Only once did he exhibit a figure painting. And so they're just less known. But this painting in particular was revered by artists like Braque and Picasso. In fact, there was a reproduction of this painting hanging in Braque's studio And so there's a way in which Corot's work in this area fed the figural work of Cézanne, definitely, and then Picasso and Braque and sort of early 20th century figural abstraction. So this is what's so wonderful about French painting, is that there is a kind of linear trajectory of development, because everybody's in Paris. It's so centralized, and generationally, all of the young Turks, as they call them, are looking at the older generation to see how they can innovate and advance French painting. And so there's a very kind of neat story that art historians are able to stitch together.
And they would go to the Louvre. They would go to the Louvre and they would copy.
Yes, exactly. They're all looking at the same. They're all in the same classroom, basically, and so it's really rich in that way. Let's see. Oh, another favorite, Vanessa, is this this wonderful painting by Gustave Caillebotte. You mentioned the exhibition that we did with the Kimball Museum called The Painter's Eye. Gustave Caillebotte, who's a less now better known, but relatively speaking, a lesser known Impressionist painter. And so we were able to do a really fun exhibition with the great masterpiece from the Art Institute of Chicago, Paris Street Rainy Day, and our wonderfully generous colleagues there, sharing that picture with both venues. This painting belonged to a California family living in Rancho Palos Verdes, and this was their wonderful family treasure. They lent it to the exhibition, and they so loved the experience of the exhibition, the sensation of having, millions of people enjoying their picture in the context of our lone exhibition, that they ended up giving it to the gallery in order to sort of permanently share it with the people. And their caveat, of course, is that we keep it on view for at least 25 years. Of course, we'll never take this painting down. It's so beautiful. It's a painting of Caillebotte's garden. He was a master gardener, a very serious gardener, just like Monet. They actually compared notes about certain strains of flowers that they were developing. In this case, dahlias, and Caillebotte had a famous collection of dahlias in his greenhouse that you see just behind this wonderful hedge. And then in the way back, that is his painting studio. So really exciting to have this come into the collection just a couple of years ago from a California family called the Scharfenbergers. So this is absolutely one of my favorites. And just to show you, we had a painting by Caillebotte in our collection already. This was a picture of these fellows in skiffs on the river Yare. And this was given by Paul Mellon, who had bought his painting at the same gallery in New York City that George Scharfenberger had bought the dahlias. So there was this moment in 1967 when the Wildensteins did a marvelous exhibition of Caillebotte. So that is exciting to have two of them. His oeuvre is a little bit rare because he ends up dying rather young, and there aren't as many Caillebottes as there are certainly Monets, Renoirs, etc.
Really more well known nowadays than he was 20 years ago. Yes. When people thought about Caillebotte, they would talk in French, we say the leg Caillebotte, meaning the donation of his collection. The donation of his collection to the French government, the French state, was highly complicated. Nobody wanted of his collection. So he was at that time much more known about his work as a collector than his work as a painter. So his fame, his glory just came up in the late 20 years, and we are very happy. We of course are very happy about that. So I think that your favorite are going to become our favorite at the National Gallery. Thank you, Mary. If we choose a topic, a theme, what would you choose in the gallery?
Well, my favorite story that we do tell, and I think moving forward, we're going to be telling more stories, as it were, with wall text, technology, reinstallations. But in 2012, I was able to reinstall the 19th century collection, and there are specific stories that each gallery tells. Only some of the galleries have actual wall texts that articulate what the story is. And this is one of my favorites. And this is the story that I'm going to just show you some of the objects in, I believe it's Gallery 85. And the organizing principle, the narrative principle in that gallery is modern Paris. and specifically what happens in Paris in the 1850s and 60s, which is the famous sort of radical, rather from an urban design point of view, violent event called Haussmannization, which was incredibly disorienting and very exciting for the young painters who would become the Impressionists. And in a way, I don't think you have Impressionism as the first modernist movement of painting without this event that occurs in the city. When the old Paris really was kind of rearranged and deconstructed, and what was born over the course of about 20-25 years is the modern Paris that we recognize. And so there's Edouard Manet, who is from an old Parisian family, spent his entire life in Paris. And all of this is happening around him as a young man. The destruction and the construction, constant over the 1850s and 60s. And he paints this picture, which belongs to the Chester Dale collection. It's a collection of paintings that are not allowed to leave the building. And so if you want to see this picture, you have to come to the gallery. So all of the exhibitions that have happened around Impressionism and Paris and Manet have not included this painting unless that project happened at the gallery. This is a picture that he does in 1862. And it's a very large painting. He intends to show it at the Salon, but he doesn't actually submit it to the Salon for some interesting reasons that if we had one whole hour to talk about this picture, I would love to go into, but I'm just going to give you sort of some basics on this painting. It's called The Old Musician. And to my mind, and there are a lot of interpretations of what's going on here, but to my mind, it's really about the people who are being kind of flushed out of the center of Paris during this aggressive moment of gentrification in the city. These are the people that would have lived in the very center of the city that were sort of pushed out to the liminal spaces outside the outer arrondissement, which are, as you know, tend to be the areas where there's more affordable housing. I mean, certainly not at this time, but where they sort of flushed people out from the city center. So you've got an itinerant musician, this bohemian with his instrument, he's playing for money. And then you have these sort of street urchins, homeless children. To the left, homeless children were a serious problem, urban problem, identified and discussed in the press, and felt to be somewhat of a threat. In fact, 1862 is the very year that Victor Hugo writes Les Misérables. And if you remember that wonderful figure in Les Mis called Gavroche, this young homeless kid, he has no family, and he just loves the idea of revolution. It's very exciting. It's a kind of fraternity that he wants to join. And so there's this sensation that this is a problem that's going to be difficult for the ruling elite. And so here Manet is painting them. And then this kind of iconic figure in the top hat at back, who is called the absinthe drinker in another composition by Manet. A kind of rag picker, an addict really. And he's a figure straight out of the poetry of Charles Baudelaire. And it's Baudelaire who actually writes the essay calling contemporary artists to picture what's going on in Paris in the moment, the epic nature of modernity in Paris at this moment. And this is an essay that absolutely inspires artists like Manet to paint pictures like this.
Mary, so many questions, and time is flying. So I don't know if we will have time to talk about Le Peintre de la Vie moderne by Baudelaire. But in fact, I need to ask you some questions from the audience. We don't have a lot of time, but well, there is one question, the first one, and it's a personal question. Mary, what is your favorite museum or collection in France?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, of course, my gosh, there's the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay, which is closer to my area of expertise. The Musée d'Orsay is 1848 to about 1914, which is specifically the area that I've most studied. I have to say that another museum that I've really fallen in love with recently is the Petit Palais, which is the museum of the city of Paris. It's kind of like the Louvre and the Orsay combined, but instead of national, it belongs to the city of Paris. I'm sure you all are very familiar with it. In one of these great exposition buildings, right across the street from the Grand Palais, the Petit Palais, a wonderful museum. And then, of course, there are the smaller museums, the Cognac J, which I love. Oh my gosh, there's so many, the Gustave Moreau, these little smaller museums are a little bit harder to find and less on the beaten track, that are nevertheless incredibly satisfying when you step into them off these smaller streets in LA's.
Wonderful. There is another question which is more technical and which appeal to your proficiency. There is a question about Gauguin and if there is or not, or how there is a relationship with the Nabi group.
Ah, yes, absolutely. So the Nabi actually, like Gauguin, I think they take their cue from Gauguin, considered themselves to be sort of missionary artists in a way. There was a spiritual component and almost religious component to their project, to their artistic project. And they were very serious. They had a kind of brotherhood that involved certain rituals. And this idea that painting could speak to the spirit, of course, in addition to the emotions and to the eye and to the intellect, but that it also could have a kind of ameliorating effect on one's own life, but also on the lives of people that engaged with your artwork. It's this really beautiful idea about art that I think most people that love art feel rather profoundly, whether or not it's Catholic or Christian, or spiritual, or a world religion, that there's something going on with really powerful artworks that transcends the material. And so this absolutely the Nabi take from Gauguin. Certainly Van Gogh felt this way. Yeah.
Emblematic work by the Nabi is named the talisman in French. I don't know the word in English, so which is very a word that is very powerful and full of spirituality and transcendence. So
beautiful.
It's in the name.
Exactly.
The emblematic work of art of the Nabi group.
Yeah.
We have just a few minutes ahead, but I have a question about the rotation of the French paintings. In fact, in your permanent collection, do you have room to show everything, or do you make rotation? I'm asking a question. This question, I completely share this question with the audience, because, for instance, when I go to the Musée d'Orsay in Paris and I want especially to see a portrait, for instance, I'm thinking about the portrait by Émile Zola made by Manet, and every time I want to go and see it, it's never shown. So we were wondering how it works for the collections of the French paintings at the National Gallery.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, in fact, the collection of the National Gallery is relatively young. So if our museum is opening just in 1941, and you think about some of the other more classical august museums in the United States, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Philadelphia, Cleveland, these are all the Metropolitan is celebrating its 150th anniversary last year. We are half that age. And so we don't actually have much art in storage. The art that we have is for the most part on the walls. And rotation, and just speaking to your Manet's portrait of Zola, which is one of the great paintings of the 19th century, absolutely. I have a feeling that painting is probably on loan to exhibitions if it's not on the walls at the Orsay. I don't think they would put that painting in storage. And when you come to the gallery and you don't find your favorite picture, it's in all likelihood, it's not in storage. We haven't put it in storage. We're lending it to an exhibition somewhere else. So I would say, I mean, I think it's actually kind of interesting that most of the great works of art that we have out. And in fact, in 1941, when we opened the West Building, there was not enough art. There were many of those galleries that I showed you were closed because there wasn't enough art to go up. But thanks to the generosity of Americans over these last 70 years, we've been able to flesh out the pre-1900 collection, certainly. And as I pointed out with the Caillebotte bequest from the Scharfenberger family, this tradition continues to this day. It's really responsible and the impetus there, of course, as it is for the Orsay and the Louvre, is the desire to share your art with, with the nation. And that's a kind of old-fashioned patriotic instinct, but it never goes away. It sort of waxes and wanes, but it's certainly a beautiful thing.
So I'm afraid we need to conclude, but I have a very last question for you, which is more of a recommendation. What do you suggest for a beginner who wants to discover French art? What would be your advice for this person? How to approach to understand French art and culture?
Well, I mean, the gallery is a great place to start because it's free and you can come in for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 3 hours. We have a lot of material online. I mean, I think that the most important thing to do is just to come and look, and you can read books and you can take classes and you can watch videos on your screen. But the best thing to do is to come and look again and keep looking and develop your eye and discover in yourself what you respond to. So whether that, that may not be French painting at all, that may be Rembrandt, or that may be Duccio, or that may be sculpture, maybe it's three-dimensional art. But I think the more that you go and look at actual art objects, you learn about yourself. And then once you figure out what's really turning you on, then you go out and, download books onto your computer, or we have our library, of course, is open to the public, and do the reading. And what you'll find is that when you start to gravitate towards what you naturally instinctively love, and then you learn more about it, that pleasure, that stimulation only enhances the more that you learn. So I call it sort of ratcheting up the buzz. I mean, find out what makes you vibrate, and then the more you learn, the more the vibration increases. And it's a lifetime activity. I mean, this is the game I'm in. The more I do, the more pleasurable it is.
It's a marvelous images.
Yeah.
So Mary, thank you very much. We are all very grateful. I say goodbye. I hope we will see all of us for the next meetings and next event of the museum series organized by the French Embassy. So thank you
so much. Thank you, Vanessa.
Bye.
Great pleasure.